The rain wouldn't stop that night. It fell in angry sheets, drumming on rooftops, splashing into gutters, and turning the streets into rivers of mud. People hurried home, clutching umbrellas and shopping bags. But under the half-broken bridge at the edge of town, a young woman sat alone, trembling from the cold. Her name was Kayamika. She was about 7 months pregnant, and her only protection from the storm was a thin shawl that was already soaked through. Her handbag, faded, torn, and frayed at the corners, served as both pillow and treasure chest. Inside it were the last few things she owned: an old photograph of her late parents, a lesson plan she once wrote for her students, and a tiny pair of pink baby socks she had bought when her life still had hope. Once, she had been a beloved primary school teacher, known for her bright smile and gentle heart. Her students adored her because she made learning feel like magic. She would tell them, "Education is the key that opens every locked door." But her world began to fall apart when she discovered her school principal had been stealing money meant for new textbooks and feeding programs. When she refused to stay silent, he framed her for misconduct. Within a week, Kayamika was fired. She went to plead her case, but no one listened. Her landlord, hearing she had lost her job, threw her out, and the man she thought loved her, the father of her unborn child, vanished without a word. Now, she sat in the dark, under the bridge, listening to the thunder like it was mocking her. Her stomach growled, but there was nothing to eat. Her hands trembled as she placed them on her belly. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered softly. "Mummy will find a way." Even in her pain, her heart refused to die. She picked up a wet stick and began tracing letters on the concrete floor. "A for apple," she murmured, her voice shaking. "B for baby. C for courage." It was silly, but it gave her comfort. She imagined her old students sitting in front of her, giggling as they repeated after her. Teaching had always been her joy, her purpose, and even the rain couldn't wash that away. Far above her, on the road, a black SUV came to a sudden stop. The driver, startled, had taken a wrong turn. The man in the back seat groaned in frustration. "Are you blind, Patrick? This is not the route I told you to take." The driver apologized quickly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll turn around now." But before he could, the man glanced out the tinted window and froze. Through the blur of rain, he saw a figure crouched under the bridge. A woman, pregnant, alone. His name was Ethan Okery, CEO of EDU Tech Holdings, one of the biggest education companies in the country. He was rich, powerful, and feared. People called him the Iron Mind because he never mixed emotion with business. To him, life was about numbers, not feelings. Yet something about that woman under the bridge made him pause. He couldn't explain why. Her face was tired, but her eyes glowed. The kind of glow that came from pain mixed with stubborn hope. "Who's that?" he asked, frowning. The driver shrugged. "Probably just another beggar, sir. There are many like her." But Ethan didn't reply. His gaze lingered. For the first time in years, his heart, the one he had buried under deadlines and profits, stirred. As the car drove off, Kayamika looked up at the sound of the engine. She couldn't see who was inside, but she whispered anyway, "Whoever you are, I hope your heart still remembers kindness." The night grew quiet again. The rain softened, and somewhere in that cold darkness, two lives, one broken, one blind to emotion, had unknowingly crossed paths. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single moment beneath the bridge would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the sky was clearer, but the ground was still wet from last night's storm. Puddles shimmered under the early sunlight, and the city buzzed with the sound of buses, horns, and chatter. Ethan Okery sat in the back seat of his sleek black SUV, scrolling through his phone and barking instructions into his earpiece. His schedule was packed: meetings, calls, and a lunch with investors. He didn't believe in wasting time, not even for breakfast. But fate had other plans. Just as they drove past the same bridge from last night, the SUV coughed twice and came to a stop. "What's going on?" Ethan snapped. "Sorry, sir," the driver said nervously, stepping out to check. "Looks like a flat battery." Ethan sighed. rubbing his temples. He was already running late. But as he looked out the window, something caught his attention. A small group of children sitting on the ground, with a familiar woman in front of them. It was Kayamika. She sat cross-legged, her swollen belly visible beneath her faded dress. In front of her, a little street boy clutched a torn spelling book. Kayamika gently corrected his pronunciation, her tone warm and kind. "No, not elephant," she said, smiling. "It's elephant. Say it again." The boy grinned shyly. "Elephant." "Perfect," she said softly, clapping her hands once. The other children, 2 girls and another boy, giggled as she wrote letters in the sand with a stick. They didn't have notebooks, but they had her, and that seemed enough. Ethan stepped out of the car, curiosity getting the better of him. The sound of her voice reached him clearly now, steady and filled with life. He stood a few meters away, watching her in silence. For some reason, the sight made his chest feel heavy. "Why are you teaching them?" he asked finally, his tone calm but puzzled. Kayamika looked up, a little startled to see the same man from last night. But she didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, brushing sand off her palm. "Because no one," she said gently, "is too poor to learn." The simplicity of her answer stunned him. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just truth. He looked at the children, barefoot, hungry, yet eager to learn every letter she wrote. It didn't make sense to him. He'd met people who had everything and still complained. Yet here was this woman, with nothing, giving what little she had to others. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Do you get paid for this?" Kayamika chuckled softly. "No, sir, but I'm paid in smiles." That small sentence shook something inside him. He felt an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time, respect. Before he could think twice, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crisp notes. "Here," he said, handing them to her. "Buy food. Or clothes." She hesitated. Her eyes darted to the money, then to his face. Slowly, she shook her head. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need your pity. I only need a chance." Her words hit him like thunder. A chance? What did she mean by that? Ethan stood there, speechless for once. People usually begged him for money, favors, or jobs. But this woman, homeless, pregnant, exhausted, asked only for an opportunity. He watched as she turned back to the children, continuing her lesson as if nothing had happened. "D is for dream," she said softly. "And dream means something you want to reach, no matter how far it looks." Something inside Ethan cracked open. For the rest of the morning, even after his driver fixed the car, he couldn't look away. When he finally left, her words echoed in his head again and again. "I don't need your pity. I only need a chance." That afternoon, Ethan sat in his glass-walled office on the 21st floor, staring at the city below. His assistant spoke about profits, new projects, and expansion plans, but he barely heard a word. His mind kept replaying the image of that woman teaching barefoot children beside a dirty bridge. He had all the power in the world, but she had something far greater: heart. And for the first time in years, Ethan Okari found himself wondering what it would feel like to truly help someone without expecting anything in return. 3 days passed, but Ethan couldn't get Kayamika's words out of his head. "I don't need your pity. I only need a chance." They replayed like a song he couldn't stop hearing, soft but powerful, cutting through every meeting, every email, every moment of silence. By the 3rd morning, he gave up pretending not to care. "Patrick," he told his driver, "take me back to the bridge." The driver blinked, surprised. "Sir, the bridge." "Yes, the bridge," Ethan repeated firmly. "And don't ask questions." When they arrived, the scene was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Under the same bridge, the one most people avoided, 5 little children sat in a circle. They were barefoot, their clothes torn and dirty, but their faces glowed with excitement. Kayamika stood before them, holding a small piece of chalk and a flat stone she used as her board. She was teaching them multiplication tables. 2 times 2 is? She asked with a smile. 4, the kids shouted proudly. Good. Now who can tell me 2 times 3? Ethan stood quietly, watching from a distance. She moved like sunlight, bright, gentle, and full of warmth. The way she clapped for the children, the way she knelt to their level, the way she made learning fun, it was magic. He had seen teachers in schools with smart boards and projectors who didn't have half her energy. When she finally noticed him, she smiled politely. "You again?" "Yes," he admitted, stepping closer. "Me again." He glanced at the classroom. Chalk marks on stone, letters drawn in sand, and children sitting on flattened cartons. "You're still teaching here?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Of course. Learning doesn't wait for comfort." He raised a brow. "Even when you have no pay, no materials?" "Even then," she said simply. "Because children's dreams shouldn't die just because they're poor." The words hit him like lightning. There was no bitterness, no sadness, just truth. He looked around again. The bridge, the broken concrete, the smell of damp earth. And yet somehow, this place felt more alive than his office ever did. He shoved his hands in his pockets, trying to hide his emotion. "You really believe that, don't you?" Kayamika smiled faintly. "I don't just believe it, sir. I've lived it. I was one of those children once." Ethan fell silent. For a long time, all he could hear was the sound of her students giggling as they practiced writing their names in the sand. One of the younger girls stumbled over the letters, and Kayamika gently guided her hand. "Well done," she said softly. "Even if you make mistakes, you're still learning. That's what matters." Something inside Ethan stirred. A feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Admiration, respect, maybe even inspiration. He took a deep breath. "Kayamika," he said quietly, "if I offered you a real classroom, would you take it?" She froze. For a moment, she wasn't sure she heard him right. Her lips parted, and her eyes widened. "A real classroom?" He nodded. "Yes, desks, boards, roof, everything." Kayamika blinked rapidly, her hands instinctively resting on her baby bump. "Even if it's a broken one, sir?" she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'll still teach." Ethan smiled. A real smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years. "Good," he said. "Then let's build something better." The children clapped, not really understanding what had just happened but sensing something good. That evening, as Ethan drove away, he felt strangely light. The noise of the city didn't bother him, and for the first time in a long while, he rolled down his window to feel the breeze. He didn't know why he cared so much about this woman or her little class, but something about her faith moved him deeply. Maybe it was her courage. Maybe it was her selflessness. Or maybe it was the way she saw hope where everyone else saw nothing. All he knew was this: he was done watching from afar. The next time he came back, he wouldn't just bring words. He would bring change. 2 days after their last conversation, Ethan kept his word. He called his secretary and said, "Find out which of our old facilities is empty. I want one cleaned, painted, and ready to use within 48 hours. "May I ask what for, sir?" she said, surprised. "For something that matters," he replied simply. The next day, Kayamika stood speechless in front of a one-story building near the outskirts of the city. It had once been a small training center for Ethan's company but had been closed for years. The paint was peeling, windows cracked, and weeds grew between the tiles. But to her, it looked like heaven. "You did this for us?" she asked softly, still in disbelief. Ethan shrugged, trying to sound casual. "It's not much, but at least it's better than that bridge." Her eyes watered. "It's more than I ever dreamed of." Within hours, she got to work. Even though her pregnancy slowed her down, her energy filled the building like sunlight. She swept floors, cleaned the walls, and sorted through old chairs and tables. The children she'd been teaching joined in too, laughing as they wiped dusty desks and helped carry small boxes. By evening, the place already looked transformed. The walls were still rough, but Kayamika painted bright shapes and letters on them using leftover paint from nearby shops. She drew colorful alphabets, suns, rainbows, and smiling faces. She called it the shelter of hope. Every day afterward, the place buzzed with life. Kayamika taught English, math, and even storytelling to her growing group of street kids. She made rules: no fighting, no stealing, always respect others. And somehow the children obeyed. They called her Auntie Kayamika, their voices filled with affection. Ethan visited often, at first out of curiosity, then because he wanted to. Each time he came, he found new surprises. A corner turned into a reading space, a wall covered in hand-drawn charts, or a group of kids singing the alphabet song at the top of their lungs. He was amazed. "You've turned this place into magic," he said one afternoon, watching her paint a wall even with her growing belly. She smiled. "Magic isn't found, sir. It's made, from love and hard work." Whenever she saw him standing idly with his hands in his pockets, she would hand him something to do. "Please help carry those books. Sir, can you fix that table leg?" Or, "Mr. Ethan, these chairs won't sweep themselves." At first he grumbled and frowned. No one ever told him what to do, not in years. But slowly her laughter softened him. He began to enjoy it. The smell of paint, the sound of children laughing, the way her eyes lit up when things came together. Sometimes he stayed longer than planned. He'd help arrange chairs, patch the leaking roof, or bring supplies from his car. Each time he told himself it was just business, a small charity project. But deep down he knew it wasn't that simple anymore. One night he arrived later than usual. The sun had gone down, and the building glowed softly from inside. He paused at the doorway, watching quietly. Kayamika sat on the floor, surrounded by children, reading a storybook aloud. Her voice was warm, steady, full of life. The children listened with wide eyes, leaning closer as if afraid to miss a word. "And the little seed grew into a big, strong tree," she read, smiling. "Because even small beginnings can become great things." Ethan's heart tightened. She wasn't just reading to them. She was reading her own story. He looked at her, the woman who had lost everything but still gave everything she had. Her glow didn't come from wealth or luxury. It came from courage, from faith. As he turned to leave that night, he whispered to himself, "Her light doesn't come from comfort. It comes from strength." And for the first time in years, Ethan realized something simple but life-changing. He wanted that light in his own life too. Weeks passed, and the shelter of hope began to look like a real school. The once empty building now echoed with laughter, songs, and the soft scratch of chalk on board. The children were learning fast, and Kayamika, though tired, was happier than she had been in a long time. Ethan visited often, at first to check progress, but soon because he simply enjoyed being there. He would stand by the window and watch the kids sing rhymes or solve math problems, and a smile would creep onto his face without permission. But Kayamika noticed something else about him. Behind his expensive suit and calm smile, there was sadness. Sometimes, when the children laughed too loudly, he'd go quiet. When she caught him staring into space, his eyes looked far away, as though he was seeing a part of himself he had forgotten. One afternoon, while they were fixing a shelf together, she finally asked, "Ethan, can I ask you something personal?" He looked up from the screwdriver in his hand. "Go ahead. Why do you look like someone who's always fighting a war inside?" He chuckled softly, though his eyes dimmed. "Because maybe I am." That was the first time he told her the truth. He had grown up poor, the son of a struggling tailor and a mother who sold snacks at bus stops. They could barely afford food, but they made sure he went to school. He studied under streetlights, shared textbooks with classmates, and walked long distances every day just to learn. "When my father died, I promised myself I'd never be poor again," he said quietly. "So I worked, and worked, until I became who I am today." Kayamika listened, her eyes soft. "And in all that working, you forgot how to feel, didn't you?" He sighed. "Kindness slows you down. That's what I used to believe. Every time I helped someone, they betrayed me, so I stopped caring. I built walls, not bridges." There was silence for a while. The sound of children playing outside drifted in through the window. Then Kayamika said something that struck him to his core. "You built an empire, Ethan, but you forgot the classroom that started it all." He stared at her, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to him like that, honestly, fearlessly. Yet instead of anger, he felt relief. Her words broke something inside him, the cold, heavy armor he'd worn for years. From that day on, things changed. Ethan stopped just visiting the shelter, he started helping. He arrived early some mornings, sleeves rolled up, arranging desks or carrying donated supplies. Sometimes he even read stories to the younger children, though he was a bit awkward at first. The kids adored him. They called him Uncle Ethan, and laughed whenever he messed up a word during reading. "Uncle Ethan, you said biddle instead of little?" One girl giggled. He laughed too, something he rarely did before. "I guess your teacher is better than me." "She is!" the children shouted in unison, and Kayamika burst out laughing. Word spread quickly. Employees from his company couldn't believe what they were hearing. Their billionaire boss spending weekends in a small community school, surrounded by barefoot children. Soon, photos began to appear online. Ethan Okari sitting on the floor, teaching alphabets. Ethan Okari painting walls beside kids. Ethan Okari carrying boxes of books. The internet went wild. People called it the Bridge School Miracle. Journalists wrote headlines like, "Billionaire gives back in the most unexpected way." When reporters asked why he was doing it, Ethan said simply, "Because one woman reminded me of what truly matters." But Kayamika didn't care about the attention. She cared about him, the man who was slowly learning to smile again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found him standing outside the shelter, staring at the kids running around with handmade paper kites. "They don't even know they're poor," he said quietly. "They just live." Kayamika smiled. "That's the beauty of children. They find joy in what's left, not in what's lost." Ethan turned to her, eyes gentle. "Thank you, Kayamika, for reminding me." She tilted her head. "Reminding you of what?" He hesitated before answering. "That the richest people aren't the ones who own the most. They're the ones who give the most." And for the first time, Kayamika saw it clearly. Behind the suit, the money, and the power, Ethan wasn't just a businessman. He was a man rediscovering his heart. The day started like any other. The sun poured through the half-open windows of the Shelter of Hope, painting golden lines across the floor. Children's voices filled the air, laughter, chatter, the sound of learning. Kayamika stood in front of the blackboard, her voice steady though her face looked pale. She had been feeling dizzy for days, but she brushed it off. "Just a little tired," she told herself. The children needed her. There was no time to rest. "Okay, everyone," she said with a small smile. "Who can spell the word family?" Little Femi raised his hand proudly. "Family." She chuckled weakly. "Close, my dear. There's an I in it because every family needs a little bit of I in it. Love for yourself too." The children laughed, but halfway through the lesson, her vision blurred. The room began to spin. The chalk slipped from her hand, and before anyone could react, she collapsed. The kids screamed, "Auntie Kayamika!" News reached Ethan within the hour. He was in a board meeting when his phone buzzed. The moment he heard the words, she fainted. He was out the door. His driver barely kept up as Ethan's car sped through the city, ignoring traffic lights. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Ethan stood outside the ward, his hands trembling, a rare sight for a man known for calm control. After what felt like forever, the doctor came out. "She's stable," he said gently, "but she's malnourished and exhausted. Her body's been under too much stress, and she's heavily pregnant. She needs rest, good food, and care." Ethan swallowed hard. Malnourished. The word cut deep. He had built skyscrapers, funded tech labs, and hosted charity events. Yet the one person who taught him the meaning of humanity had gone hungry under his watch. When he entered her room, Kayamika lay on the bed, looking small and fragile. Her face was pale, but she smiled faintly when she saw him. "You look worried," she whispered. He sat beside her, guilt heavy in his chest. "You scared everyone," he said quietly. "The kids cried all afternoon, and I should have taken better care of you." She reached for his hand weakly. "You already have, Ethan. You gave me purpose again. That's more healing than any medicine. He looked down, his throat tightening. Purpose doesn't fill an empty stomach, he said. Her smile softened. But love does. They stayed like that for a while, hands entwined, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain against the hospital window. It was the same kind of rain that had first brought them together, the kind that washed away everything false and left only truth behind. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by her bedside long after visiting hours ended. The monitors beeped quietly, and he watched her breathe, remembering how alive she looked when she taught. He remembered her laughter echoing through the shelter, her patience with every child, her courage even when she had nothing, and the thought of losing her, even for a moment, terrified him. He whispered, "You've given so much, Kayamika. It's my turn now." When the nurse brought in her food, he insisted on feeding her himself. She protested at first, embarrassed, but he smiled gently. "For once, let someone else take care of you." She chuckled softly. "You're stubborn. Maybe I'm learning from the best," he replied. Later that night, he stepped out into the hospital corridor. The rain tapped gently against the windows, rhythmic, calm, and strangely comforting. He stood there, hands in his pockets, heart full of something he hadn't felt in years. Faith. He looked up at the ceiling and made a silent promise. Never again. Never again would Kayamika or those children go hungry. Never again would he hide behind work while good people suffered. When he returned to her room, she was asleep, her hand resting on her belly. He sat beside her again, whispering to the baby growing inside her, "Don't worry, little one. Your mother will never struggle alone again." And as the night deepened, Ethan Okari, the man once known as the Iron Mind, closed his eyes and prayed, not for wealth, not for success, but for the strength to keep his promise, and the faith to become the kind of man who deserved her trust. The days moved slowly after Kayamika's collapse. She was stronger now, walking around the shelter again, helping with lessons and smiling more often. Her belly had grown beautifully round, and the children loved to touch it, giggling as the baby kicked. "Your baby will be a teacher like you, Auntie," one of them said one morning. Kayamika laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll be a dreamer like you." Ethan visited every day without fail. He brought fruits, baby clothes, vitamins, and sometimes just himself, to listen, to learn, and to watch her glow. But one afternoon, as he was leaving the shelter, he overheard two women talking outside the gate. "Poor woman," one said. "Her fiancé left her the moment he found out she was pregnant." "Can you imagine?" the other replied. "He even took all her savings before disappearing." Ethan froze, his heart clenched. He turned back immediately and found Kayamika sitting on a wooden bench, humming softly while marking the children's exercise books. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. She looked up, surprised. "What is?" He hesitated, then said, "That the man who was supposed to marry you left you and stole your savings." Kayamika went still. For a few seconds, she didn't answer. The soft breeze moved strands of hair across her face, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm but distant. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's true." Ethan clenched his fists, anger rising like fire in his chest. "How could he? After everything you gave him?" She smiled faintly. "That's the thing about people, Ethan. Sometimes the ones you trust most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." He stepped closer, still struggling to stay calm. "If I ever see him—" "Don't!" she interrupted gently, her voice firm. "Don't hate him. He already has his punishment. He has to live with himself." Ethan stared at her, speechless. "You're telling me to forgive a man who abandoned you while you were pregnant and left you on the streets?" Kayamika nodded. "Yes, because hate only keeps me tied to him. I've learned to let go." Her words hit him harder than a storm. Here she was, the woman who had lost everything, yet spoke of forgiveness like it was the easiest thing in the world. He, who had built empires and destroyed competitors without blinking, suddenly felt small beside her strength. "Life already punished him enough," she said softly, "and I refuse to let bitterness raise my child." Ethan sat down beside her, shaking his head in disbelief. "You amaze me, Kayamika. You really do." She looked at him with her usual gentle smile. "Pain can make you better or bitter. I just chose better." For a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the laughter of children playing nearby. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the courtyard, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, something warm and strange. He realized that all the years he had spent chasing power and wealth, he had missed the real lessons of life. Lessons this woman, once homeless and broken, was teaching him without even trying. He thought of how he used to see love as a weakness, an obstacle to success. But sitting next to Kayamika, he saw it differently. Love wasn't weakness. Love was courage. It was power, the kind that healed wounds money could never touch. That night, as he drove home, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. He imagined her sitting under the dim light of the shelter, reading bedtime stories to the children, her voice calm and strong. He thought about her forgiveness, her kindness, and the peace she carried like a quiet fire. In a world full of greed and selfishness, she was proof that goodness still existed. When he finally got home, he stood by his window, looking out at the glittering city lights. The view that once filled him with pride now felt empty. He whispered to himself, "Love isn't weakness, it's strength." From that day on, Ethan Okari, the man who once believed kindness was a flaw, began to see compassion as the greatest kind of power there was. And it all started with a woman who had nothing, yet gave him everything that truly mattered. The morning came with a strange quietness. The children at the Shelter of Hope were playing softly outside, while Kayamika sat by the window, rubbing her belly gently. She was due any day now, and everyone could feel the excitement building. Ethan had arranged everything, the hospital, the baby supplies, even a nurse who visited daily to check on her. But Kayamika, being who she was, still insisted on teaching until the very last week. "The children need to finish their reading test," she said with a laugh. That afternoon, while helping a little girl spell butterfly, she suddenly winced. The chalk dropped from her hand. A sharp pain shot through her lower back. "Auntie Kayamika, are you okay?" the kids asked, their faces full of worry. She tried to smile. Yes, I think it's just..." Another wave of pain cut her words short. Within minutes, Ethan was running into the classroom. "What happened?" "She's having the baby," one of the children shouted. Ethan didn't think twice. He scooped her into his arms, despite her protests, and hurried to the car. "Ethan, I can walk," she said, embarrassed. "Not on my watch," he replied, trying to sound calm, though his heart was racing faster than the car engine. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. Rain clouds gathered in the sky, just like the night they first met under the bridge. Ethan remembered that moment vividly, the frightened yet determined look in her eyes, the voice that refused to break even when everything else had fallen apart. Now here she was, about to bring new life into the world. At the hospital, nurses rushed to help her into the delivery room. Ethan paced the corridor, his palms sweating, his mind spinning. He wasn't family, not by blood at least, but his heart refused to leave. Every scream from the room made his chest tighten. He prayed under his breath, "Please let her and the baby be okay." Hours passed. Finally, just after sunset, the door opened. A nurse stepped out with a tired smile. "Congratulations, sir," she said. "It's a girl." Ethan blinked. "She's okay?" "Both of them. They're perfect," the nurse said warmly. "You can see her now." He walked into the room slowly. Kayamika lay there, exhausted but glowing. In her arms was a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The world seemed to stop for a moment. "She's beautiful," Ethan whispered. Kayamika looked up and smiled weakly. "Meet Hope." He frowned slightly. "Hope?" "Yes," she said softly. "Because she's proof that no matter how dark life gets, something beautiful can still be born from it." Ethan felt something swell in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. The baby opened her eyes just a little, and he saw a calmness there, the kind that only innocence carries. He reached out, hesitating, but Kayamika nodded. "Go on." she whispered. He gently took the baby into his arms. She was so light, so fragile, yet she carried more power than anything he had ever built. He felt tears forming, unexpected, unstoppable. For years, he had cried only in silence, when no one could see. But this time he didn't hide. The tears rolled freely down his cheeks. "She's not mine," he said softly, his voice trembling. "But she reminds me of everything good I lost trying to be powerful." Kayamika smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Maybe she's here to remind you that power isn't bad. It just needs a heart behind it." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had once been broken now glowed with peace, her strength shining brighter than ever. Later that night, when the baby was asleep in a small crib beside them, Ethan sat quietly by Kayamika's bedside. The rain outside began to fall again, gentle and rhythmic. "Do you realize," she said drowsily, "that every time rain has touched our lives, something good has followed?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe it's God's way of washing away the past." Kayamika smiled, her eyes fluttering shut. "Then let the rain fall, Ethan." He nodded slowly, watching both mother and child sleep peacefully. And in that stillness, he realized something profound. This wasn't just the birth of a baby. It was the birth of hope in him too. For years, Ethan had built buildings, companies, and fortunes. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was part of building something far greater. A new beginning. And as the thunder rolled softly in the distance, he whispered to himself, "Maybe miracles don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes, they cry in your arms." Months passed like pages in a storybook. The city slowly began to hear about the shelter of hope, how a once homeless pregnant woman turned a forgotten building into a safe space for children who had nowhere else to go. But Ethan wasn't done. He wanted the message to reach farther, beyond that one building, beyond the bridge where it all began. "Let's build more," he said one evening as he and Kayamika sat outside watching the kids play. "More shelters, more classrooms. Let's take what you started and multiply it." Kayamika looked at him, surprised. "You mean more schools?" He nodded, his eyes filled with purpose. "Yes, a network of learning centers for children like these, and for single mothers too. A place where no one is too poor to learn." Her eyes filled with tears. "That was my dream, Ethan. But I never thought it could happen." He smiled gently. "Dreams don't die when the dreamer keeps believing." And so it began. Ethan poured his resources into creating something new, the Bridge School Foundation, named after the very place where he had first met her. What started under a cracked bridge became the symbol of hope for thousands. The first official branch opened with bright walls, neat desks, and shelves filled with books. But the most beautiful thing wasn't the paint or the furniture. It was the laughter that echoed through the halls. The students were children once forgotten by society. Orphans, street hawkers, and young mothers who had left school too soon. Kayamika stood proudly at the opening ceremony, dressed in a simple blue gown, holding baby Hope in her arms. Cameras flashed. The media had shown up, curious about the story behind this project that everyone was talking about. When Ethan stepped up to the microphone, people expected a business speech filled with figures and plans. But instead, he spoke from the heart. "Months ago," he began, "I met a woman under a bridge. She had nothing, no home, no money, no comfort. But she had something greater, compassion. She was teaching children with stones and chalk on the ground, not because she had to, but because she believed every child deserves a chance." He paused, looking at Kayamika and baby Hope. "She reminded me that kindness teaches louder than money speaks." The crowd fell silent. Cameras flashed, but no one made a sound. In that moment, people didn't just see a billionaire. They saw a man transformed by kindness. From that day, the Bridge School Foundation became a movement. More centers opened across the country, each one painted with the same bright colors and carrying the same motto written across its entrance: "No child too poor to learn. No mother too broken to rise." Kayamika became the foundation's director. She trained new teachers, encouraged young women, and organized community reading days. Every time she walked through a classroom and saw a child reading confidently, or a mother learning to write her name for the first time. She felt her heart swell. She was no longer the homeless pregnant teacher. She was now Madame Kayamika, the woman who turned pain into purpose. As for Ethan, he changed too. The man who once cared only about profits now spent his weekends at the centers, playing with kids, teaching basic math or fixing desks. He even started a scholarship program for brilliant students who wanted to attend university. One day, during a television interview, a reporter asked him, "Mr. Okari, you've built empires and companies. Why this? Why education?" Ethan smiled, remembering the bridge, the rain, and the woman who had changed everything. "Because," he said softly, "money builds buildings, but kindness builds people. And people, not profits, are what truly matter." The clip went viral within hours. People across the nation shared it, inspired by the story of the billionaire and the teacher who built bridges instead of walls. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan stood with Kayamika on the balcony of one of their schools. The air smelled of chalk, new paint, and dreams. Children's laughter echoed from the playground below. He turned to her. "You know, you didn't just change my life, Kayamika. You changed an entire city." She smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. "We changed it together, Ethan. One heart at a time." As the wind rustled through the flags bearing the words, "The Bridge School Foundation," Ethan realized that miracles weren't made of magic. They were made of people, ordinary people who refused to give up, who chose love over hate, and who believed that one act of kindness could change the world. Years passed, but the story of the Bridge School Foundation continued to grow like a tree whose roots were watered by kindness. What began as one small shelter became dozens of learning centers across Nigeria, each one filled with laughter, dreams, and second chances. Ethan Okari was no longer known as the ruthless billionaire or the iron mind. People now called him the bridge builder. He still wore fine suits, but the man inside them had changed. His voice was softer, his eyes kinder, and his smile easier. Everywhere he went, people admired him not for his wealth, but for his heart. Yet whenever reporters asked how he had changed, he always gave the same answer. "I met a teacher under a bridge." As for Kayamika, she had become a national inspiration. She continued to lead the foundation with grace and passion, guiding teachers, training volunteers, and mentoring young women who once thought their dreams were over. Her little girl, Hope, grew up surrounded by love and learning, a symbol of everything beautiful that had come from pain. Hope was now about 8 years old, bright and curious like her mother. She loved to follow Ethan around, holding his hand at every school event. She called him Uncle Ethan, though everyone knew he was more than that. He was family. Together, the three of them traveled across the country, visiting schools in villages and cities alike. They handed out scholarships, books, uniforms, and, most importantly, encouragement. Ethan often told the children, "Don't let where you sleep decide how high you'll climb." The kids adored him, and Kayamika always watched with quiet pride. The man who once believed kindness was weakness now taught others that kindness was the greatest strength. One golden evening, after a long day of visiting schools, Ethan and Kayamika stopped by the bridge where everything had started. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the city. The same bridge that had once been dark and broken now had new lights and murals, one of which showed a painting of a pregnant woman teaching children. Kayamika smiled as she stared at it. "I can't believe this is where you found me," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice gentle. "And I can't believe how far we've come since that night." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You changed my life, sir." He shook his head slowly, his lips curving into a warm smile. "No, Chiamaka. You changed mine." There was a pause, the kind that said everything words couldn't. The wind blew softly, carrying the faint laughter of children playing nearby. The bridge, once a symbol of pain and poverty, now stood as a monument of transformation. A reminder that hope could bloom anywhere, even under broken concrete. Hope, who had been chasing butterflies nearby, ran to them. "Mummy, Uncle Ethan, come see this," she shouted, pointing to the mural. Ethan bent down beside her. "Do you know who that woman is?" Hope grinned proudly. Of course. That's you, Mummy. The teacher who helped children like me. Kayamika laughed, tears shining in her eyes. Ethan watched them both, his heart full. He thought about everything. The bridge, the shelter, the sleepless nights, the laughter, the lessons, the forgiveness, and realized that this was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Not just buildings, but lives rebuilt. Not just success, but compassion. As the sun sank behind the skyline, Kayamika's laughter echoed through the breeze, soft and musical. It carried through the streets, touching hearts just like her story had. And in that golden silence, Ethan finally understood the truth, that sometimes the most broken souls don't just need saving. They become the ones who save others. Because love, faith, and kindness, once shared, never truly die. They just build more bridges.